This is the Backpass, a podcast for sports nerds by sports nerds.
Welcome to the Backpass. On today's episode, we have part 2 of the rise of franchise cricket. Join us to discuss as we delve further on into T20 cricket and the rise of franchise cricket. Hello and welcome to the Backpass. I'm your host Ali Bilwala, and today we continue with part 2 of our rise of franchise cricket. I'm joined by Kevin and Shivang to continue talking cricket and continue on from where we left it, guys. We were talking about where we kind of started with cricket, where we started with the colonial beginnings of cricket and how it spread across the world and the importance it played to the countries in the many different regions, about having to go back to England and play against England or dominate in that sense and then continue to dominate the game. And also the growth as we saw Test cricket starting to dwindle and more excitement come in with, the flash of the ODIs, and which saw a lot of color, which saw World Cups, which saw tournaments come in as we saw the excitement begin. And then ODIs were still exciting, right? Like ODIs were still continuing to be exciting. Did they need to get more exciting, Kevin?
I think so. We've spoken about this in previous podcasts, but ODI, the format had started to stagnate a little bit with Australian dominance. And I think, it's one of these formats where it's limited in scope, and therefore it can be solved. And that's what we're seeing now in modern ODI cricket. It's very much solved. There's a pattern that you can use to win. If you follow that pattern, you're most likely to win. And it just becomes somewhat of somewhat of just an exercise of cricket as opposed to a real competition, especially in those middle overs.
The overs nobody watches, 15 to 35?
Yeah, pretty much.
So you saying that it would be similar if we just watch Man City dominate? We're like, okay, this is getting boring. Let's just change football. Let's make it 40 minutes. Maybe change some rules where players aren't allowed in certain areas. Is that what's kind of roughly what kind of happened?
I think any Man City game is good at the very beginning and at the very end. So it actually follows with ODI cricket pretty well.
And this is how they formed the Super League without Man City.
I think this is probably going on us end's like next top ideas list for how to rejig football. But what were the inklings, kind of, Shivang? What kind of laid the seed for this potential T20 format?
Yeah, so it's kind of like what Kevin said, right? The Australian team was dominating the scene too much, and so cricket in itself was losing a bit of its shine. And then you either have a game that lasts 5 days or you have a game that lasts 8 overs. So there was an issue with audience retention as well. And generally, if you think as a fan and not as a cricket nerd, what are you most interested in? Big hits, big sixes, big bounce, or a lot of wickets or action in the field. And if you take all of that, if you condense the format so everybody has no choice but to hit, you sprinkle in a few cheerleaders or something, you make the whole thing more engaging by miking up the plays on the pitch and just making it a fun atmosphere. That was sort of like the recipe that they followed. Interestingly, actually, they first trialed the T20 format in the women's game a year before they actually tried it in the domestic version, the domestic form of the game, and then they brought it to men's cricket.
Which shows how much it was not considered a pure form of cricket, quotation marks on the pure. how it was looked down upon when we first kind of got that format. And T20 wasn't the first of its kind of shrunken format for one days. There was a lot of different formats tried, a lot of different rules. There were some different ones in New Zealand.
Martin Crowe's Super 12.
2 innings.
Yeah.
Yeah. They had the Super Max, which was like they had a max scoring zone. You scored double if you hit straight. And then there was even playing 2 innings in a ODI kind of condensed format. So you still bat 50 overs, but you play 2 innings of 25. So both teams play 2 innings of 25. But T20 seemed to find its way through that. And so originally, county cricket got its demo. We got to see it through the English county cricket, and then we got to see the women play it and, work through that first T20 International, which is great for the women's game because T20 actually has been fantastic for the women's game, right?
It's actually the most popular format in the women's game.
Yeah. It's not so obvious when you look at it just on paper, but T20 has a couple of winning factors that I think has made it so successful. But one of the biggest winning factors as a father with a young child, it's short enough that you can take a child, between the ages of 3 or under the ages of 7 to a game to watch cricket, and you're going to be able to get into that sweet spot of between nap and bedtime. So, and that's from a demographic perspective, that's one of the biggest issues with, I guess, one-day cricket. Yeah. Yes, it's a short form, but it's still a day of cricket. So it really makes it difficult for the young kids to get involved live.
It's a commitment.
Mind you, even when the thing started, it didn't actually have all the players on board. Like if you go back to the first men's T20 that was played between Australia and New Zealand all the way back in 2005, and before anybody makes a joke, yes, I was born. I wasn't a teenager, but I was born. There's reports from the game that neither team, Australia or New Zealand, took it seriously, and Punter high scored in the game, and after the game when they had the post-match interview, he said, look, it feels okay. I'm not too sold on it. I don't think the novelty will stick on for a long time.
Yeah, it was a glorified exhibition match. It was something similar to, you see Rafael Nadal and Federer get on the court, play some doubles, and then they put a mic on and they're kind of joking around and talking to the crowd and talking to the commentators while playing. That's the kind of feel it had, and no one was really taking it seriously. I think except for England, and it kind of showed in the first few years of T20, and obviously the West Indies really took to it as well. Like they found it perfect for their abilities and what they could kind of maximize themselves in. And they had just that great balance of, power hitting with everyone who could bowl, who can also throw the ball, bowl a little bit. And it was a fantastic mix for them.
Yeah. It's definitely reminds me of other sporting events like the Pro Bowl in American football, where it's not really competition. It's more like just players getting out and, to showcase, get more crowd interaction, that kind of stuff, as opposed to, a real competition. And I think it was Glenn McGrath who jokingly did a Trevor Chappell underarm, and Billy Bowden showed him a red card. Like that's the sort of atmosphere that you had in T20 cricket. So, at the very start. But another reason why it was so successful was because of the fact that, and this is true in the women's game, especially true in the women's game, the talent level required to play T20 cricket is actually at a lower level than what it is for test or one-day games, because you can have an average of 30, and if you have a strike rate of, say, 100, 150, you're a pretty good, T20 batsman. Yeah, and from a bowling perspective, yes, you have to be a good bowler, and you have to, have to have good line, good length, but you don't have to have it for as long as McGrath did. Like, it's not like a hyper consistent line.
Consistency for 10 overs.
Yeah, exactly.
Or be that threatening with a ball like Dale Steyn.
Yeah.
You just have to be like a defense. You can be a defensive bowler and do a great job in T20, right? It'll get you wickets as well, because suddenly batsmen are trying to get out to you.
Yeah.
They can't hack the bowling lines.
Yeah.
And case in point, in an ODI, a bowling average of, not average, but a bowling economy of 4.5 to 5 is considered pretty good these days, whereas 4.5 to 5 is exceptional in T20. 7 to 8 is what seems to be acceptable. So obviously the threshold for a par is much higher.
And I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, Kevin. And it seems like T20 was also partially born out of just marketability and marketing. And basically, it's like, how do we package the sport so that we can package it a lot more, fill it with a bunch of ads. You could watch the IPL. If you ever watch the IPL, there's a ton of ads. And then just be able to ship a ton of games within a day even. Right,
Yep.
Shivam?
Yep. And the other thing is the toll on the human body is much lower in T20 cricket. So all your big stars, they could continue playing franchise cricket for a long time or play matches in quick succession. So, you could have Sachin Tendulkar playing 6 weeks of T20 cricket non-stop, or after a day's rest, obviously, whereas you couldn't do it in either format. And if Sachin's playing, all of India's watching. And if you only have 4 hours of ad slots, well, guess what happens to the price per second?
Yeah, exactly. And no, that's a great point, Shivam, because obviously with the ODI, you're fielding for 50 overs, so that's 50 overs out on your feet, about 3.5 hours, running around, chasing a ball, moving positions every over. For Test cricket, you could be there for 8 hours in the field, standing there, going back and forth, standing still, running around. So it definitely does take some effort, and batting. And if you had to bat for like 2 hours, that's a toll as well on a lot of your joints and arms. And T20, 2 hours, the game's done.
Yeah,
it's like you're never going to get to bat that long.
Unless your name is KL Rahul.
That's a defensive strategy, KL Rahul.
Well, KL Rahul is very, what's the right word? He's very prudent with his time at the crease, within the fact that he doesn't like spending a lot of time there. It's spends a few balls and then he's kind of like, all right, I'm out of here. I'll see you guys later.
It's in the best interest of the bowling team to keep him at the crease. It's like this weird game where the longer he's there, the better it is for the bowling team.
Yeah, it's that weird thing that happened in football once, where both teams were trying to score own goals and trying to prevent the other team from scoring an own goal.
Yes.
They're like, the bowlers try to bowl super safe, and they're like, please don't get out, please don't get out, please don't get out.
And then when he does get out, the team obviously wins afterwards, which is like a reverse talisman effect. It's very unique. You almost have to have him in the team just because you know that if he gets out for like 3 or 4 runs, you'll probably win the game.
Yeah, you get him out early enough. Oh well, yeah. And then you have also obviously the big kick on for T20. What really brought it, started the big massive money printing machine was the IPL. I think it was the first of its kind in that kind of scale and that kind of marketing, all the strategic timeouts just so they could fit more ads.
2.5 minutes of ads, yeah.
Yeah.
Even the strategic timeouts an ad.
Yeah, it is. It
exists
exactly
purely for
that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, like, hey guys, just stop playing cricket for a couple minutes so we can have an ad break, please. And it was clearly and it's successful, and it was successful, and it wasn't even the first one, right? BCCI got beat to the punch, but then they just did what BCCI do, and they banished and banned everyone else in the ICL.
Something that actually worked in the BCCI's favor was the momentum that winning their 2007 T20 World Cup brought along. So after India won the 2007 World Cup, there was a lot of interest in the format now. And so the timing just worked out. It's a bit unfortunate with what happened with the ICL. You didn't have the breakaway league and so the Stars going that way. But, I mean, the IPL now is what it is.
Yeah, I think it's... I don't know if you ever played Mario Kart before, but you know how there's those speed up strips, the booster lines? It was that World Cup, that plus the fact that the Indian middle class had a huge growth and had gotten to the point where they had disposable income, which meant that there was money to be had in these kinds of short format games. Now, there's an audience for it, and you have a tournament.
They have the
and you have the World Cup. It becomes like this triple accelerator that once you start getting in players from international teams, players like, if I remember, Shane Warne was a part of the Rajasthan Royals. Yeah. Once you get names like that involved, it starts to like really accelerate, and it just sort of took off from there.
Shane Warne, Glenn McGrath,
Simons.
Simons was big. Yeah.
Gilly.
Ponting
played
it.
I think Ponting played.
Dravid.
Yeah.
Dravid played for Rajasthan?
Yeah.
Was 1 year?
Was Dravid Rajasthan or Bangalore?
I thought it was...
Bangalore, sorry. Yeah.
Because he was the first season had the concept of star player.
Yeah.
Players that didn't add towards your transfer pool, and you just paid them 30%.
And of course you had Sachin.
Yeah.
And I love the Mario Kart analogy though, Kevin. It was like that speed up strip, but the BCCI and the IPL were also holding a turtle shell, which they threw at the ICL. It kind of spent them for a spin, and it just zoomed right past.
Yeah.
So that seemed to kind of really, really work. That was a brilliant analogy. So going forward, now that we've seen IPL kind of and the T20 format dominate so much, it's kind of thrown ODI for a spin, right? Like, what do we do with our poster child of yesteryear?
Well, yeah. Well, the ODI side of it is it's a bit of collateral damage, as you mentioned.
Some of it is self-inflicted as well, right? Like, yes, there is the collateral damage of having a shorter format, but then if you gear the game far too much towards the batsman, like, the ball doesn't reverse swing anymore, or the fielding restrictions only exist for 10 overs instead of 15, it's basically a self-inflicted end to the game.
Yeah, you're right. It kind of did happen in that way, and it just, they brought in all the rules to make the first 15 overs and the last 15, 20 overs exciting. Yeah. And they just forgot about the middle overs and, kind of doing anything with that. So it just became the most boring thing where you're like, I'm going to go do something else. I'll come back and see if anything's really changed, because no one really tries to get a wicket or try to hit a boundary.
Exactly. All teams cared about in that time was rotating strike and making sure you don't lose wickets, so that by the time you get to over 35, you have 5 or 6 wickets in hand, and then you can just blast it from there. So there was no appetite for whatever happened between overs 15 and 35.
Exactly. Which then puts an interesting spin on what's going to happen with the ODI World Cup coming up, and if it will live up to some of the excitement from the T20 World Cup as well later in the year. And this has also brought out some of the globalization. We're seeing, obviously, yesteryear, before franchise cricket, you would never see Glenn McGrath, coaching or sitting down and bowling in a bowling lineup with Indian young fast bowlers or pace bowlers, right? You imagine having that kind of experience within the team, or sitting down next to punter for young Indians, or Kiwis, and say a Kiwi or Kiwi and an Englishman sitting in the same dressing room and opening the batting together. Watching Brendan McCullum come in and smash all those runs that he did, and the way he does it, the way he approaches the game, and having all those different takes that came from outside. And now we have this kind of kind of, like the traveling herd. This group of T20 players who travel around the world playing in the different T20 leagues, and that is all they do through the year. They just follow the sun.
The wild Thornberrys of international cricket.
Yeah.
And the biggest, I think, one of the biggest benefactors is coaching. I think there's globally, it's allowed coaches to try a whole, different number of weird and interesting ways of setting up batting lineups, setting up bowling lineups. You now see it's more common, or at least it's a little bit less unique to see, for instance, a test match open with 2 spin bowlers on the right pitch. Like, coaches are willing to do that, or teams are willing to make that, what is typically considered traditional cricket, make adjustments to it and try new things, which is great for the game. It also means that you have, and I think baseball is probably a great example of this, a new approach to old ways, maybe variations of old ways. Like, I think probably teams have tried baseball but never really had the lineup to be able to do it, or the skill. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Skill, yeah.
It's actually brought about a lot of confidence in the players as well. That translates really nicely into Test cricket. No longer is 100-run chase in 10 overs considered impossible in Test cricket. Like, players have done it.
Yeah. And I guess a flip side, looking at Test cricket, back in the day, a team going at 3.5 to 4 runs and over in Test cricket was like, wow, they're going quick.
Going fast, yeah.
They're going through this fast, like they're being aggressive here, where that's kind of the norm now, almost. Test cricket is faster because of IPL, so there's a bit more excitement in Test cricket, perhaps, with all these players now also playing IPL, they're a bit more confident in backing themselves to hit a shot or to go after the ball a bit more.
It's led to some really spectacular batting collapses as well. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but at the same time,
you have the reverse sweep gate as well.
You know what's weird about that? Kerry did that for like 3 games consecutively afterwards. It's like he never got the memo that this is not a good idea to try.
He did it in the World Test Championship final. He's done it a couple of times in the Ashes.
He's got the memory of a goldfish. Like, they're supposed to use it as a good thing where you're like, you can just keep trying it. But in this case, it's like, no, dude, just remember.
Well, I mean, that's it.
Just remember what happened.
Having short-term memory is like considered a good thing in a lot of sports, so that you can forget when you do something. Yeah, make a mistake or embarrass yourself or something like that. But I'm not sure in this case.
Too far.
Yeah.
Well, he just made a mistake or embarrassed himself, so he's like, forget about it. I'll try it again next time.
Johnny Bairstow comes to mind.
Yeah. Well, he didn't make the same. Oh, he kind of did. He kind of dropped a few catches.
Did.
Yeah.
Kind of did.
Yeah.
And then we have like this growing IPL and BBL are obviously very popular tournaments around the world, watched globally as well. There was a Champions League for a little bit, with T20 Champions League, where all the teams from different parts of the world came together and played against each other. But there were more problems with that because the teams were sharing players essentially. So IPL sucked all the good players for that tournament, and which meant all the other teams were greatly weakened, and we really didn't get any kind of proper contest, and we just saw IPL teams win most of the time. But there isn't that, how do we foster that same rivalry and tribalism that does exist in, say, England, Australia, or in India, Australia, at that franchise level?
Yeah, I think it's probably IPL's biggest, or even T20 cricket's biggest flaw at the moment. It's what's probably going to lead to a little bit of a downswing in T20 watching, viewership and money through the gate, but not enough to affect it. Not enough to affect it in the long term, if they can get this stuff right. Like there is some I guess, genuine dislike for teams like CSK, for instance, for obvious reasons. But there's nothing like the hatred that you have between Man City and Man U, or, you know, Tottenham and everybody else. So it's a bit like, and I think it's because at the very start they try to manufacture it with the celebrities getting involved and all that kind of stuff, and it just didn't feel real enough. There was not enough situations for there to be angst. I guess what we need is like some massive refereeing blunders, which I don't think will happen nowadays with all the sporting technologies that they use and stuff like that.
Fair enough.
But like the closest that I can think of recently is the punt situation where he ran on the field. I had a conversation with the umpire. I don't think, you know, I think it's going to take a while to generate that kind of hatred and rivalry.
I mean, give it a couple more years of Virat Kohli and Naveen ul Haq or Gautam Gambhir. You might start to see the first ever cricketing rivalry, like Lucknow versus Bangalore.
Is there also, like, Shivanka, I was going to ask you this, is that also like the fact that the teams change quite dramatically, or quite a big chunk of the teams change every 2 to 3 years, kind of preventing that as well, because it kind of like, I'll be playing with him like next year, so I'm not going to really get under his skin.
Basically everybody's friends with everybody now. Back in the day, before IPL or BBL, the biggest source of contention was you genuinely hated the opposition player. Like, as an Indian fan, you hated the guts of the Aussie team back in the day. They were good, but boy, you hated them. You hardly hate any...
The Indian-Pakistan rivalry as well.
Yeah, exactly. But if Davey Warner's like a TikTok sensation in Hyderabad because of how long he spent there, how do you hate him in the Australian team?
So it's watering down international tribalism as well.
I sure feel that way. I mean, India-Pakistan stays because there's no franchise cricket that happens between them or the players. So that rivalry stays on.
You want to know what the easiest way to solve this problem? Just merge the Pakistan Super League with IPL, and then you'll have rivalries instantaneously.
And that is how you create tribalism.
Yes.
Yeah, that would definitely cause a lot of chaos. I mean, Brett Lee has a hit single in India, right? Like, he actually sang, and he's got a hit single. And that kind of waters down some more rivalry. I mean, he's respected, but then it's also like he's loved by the Indian audience. And it's like, I love watching him play, and just don't like him playing against my team.
What if you made an Asian Champions League of franchise cricket?
I think you'd have to have some commitment, long-term commitment from international players in whatever league that they're playing in. I think there's a lot of West Indian players in the Pakistan League and there's some in the Bangladesh League. So if you could figure out a way to manage that, then you could probably do it. But I also think that the IPL's like this another factor with the IPL. Even if we did like a Pakistan Super League joined with the IPL and, you know, had that kind of rivalry, it'd be pretty one-sided pretty quickly, because most of the IPL teams, it's the IPL. Like the Indian cricket market, the talent pool is just too significant, and the IPL reduces the difficulty in the entry level into cricket.
Yeah. And this is the other part of it as well. Like, it's obviously improved. We're now seeing a larger chunk of talent having to come through because they now have to play in the IPL and win these important matches and play these big games, which, even though they were doing it at Ranji level, maybe, wasn't kind of the same pressure with the TV and the crowds and, you know, in that same atmosphere against internationals, say, against the likes of David Warner, against the likes of AB de Villiers and, you know, that kind of players of that kind of ilk, and having to perform against them. Is that improving homegrown talent? Is that hurting homegrown talent? The fact that there's that many overseas players that you only have, you know, 3 or 4 players in a team that can really break through or really play consistently.
I think it makes the upcoming generation a lot more fearless. Like, if you're already used to facing Mitchell Stark bowling in swingers at the death as a 19-year-old playing T20 cricket, there's not much more in front of a packed house with 60,000 people cheering one way or another. There isn't a lot more pressure situations that you can be exposed to outside of that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd probably also say that while the talent is getting polished to a high level, the BCCI is still gatekeepers. So it's not actually allowing for the talent to come through at the level that, at the right pace that it should. So we're seeing delays in pretty talented cricketers getting to the international team. There's a bit of a logjam there because they're still thinking in this 3 format, pick the best player across all 3, not so much looking at specialists. Whereas you can see this with other countries like England, and Australia's starting to do this as well, where there's specialist T20 players, specialist Test cricketers, and specialist one-dayers.
Yeah. They almost have different squads and different captains, very different squads. Only a couple of players actually go across the different formats.
So unless if that changes, I don't think we're still. I mean, they'll get better. Like, we see talent get better faster. That's definitely true. Like, I keep on harping out about this guy. I think you've used him as an example at 6 different occasions. But Yashasvi Jaiswal is I think he's
There's
the
no better example, to be honest.
He's the poster child for how quickly you can develop through IPL. Within 3 seasons, I want to say 3 seasons approximately, he's come to a level where he's international. He should be picked internationally. And
so there's obviously a connection there with him and Rajasthan, right? But what happens if Rajasthan decide they don't want to keep him, or they can't keep him, and suddenly he's now plying his trade for Mumbai or Kolkata or Bangalore? Like, does it lose that little bit of that tribalism? Because there's obviously a connection there. He's a local kid. He kind of the Rajasthan fans have seen this kid progress to becoming this player, and suddenly he's like, oh, he's gone now. Sorry, we couldn't do much about it. Carry on.
I think in lieu of these franchises having their own sort of academies or something, yes, this is the only way you can have those sort of local connections. I mean, unless your name is Dhoni and you play for Chennai for so long that they basically elevate you to the level of Thala. But yeah, that's basically it. There's no other way you can build associations or oneness with players and fans.
I'm hesitant to propose 10-year contracts or 5-year contracts in the IPL because I know at the same time, purely from compared to other competitions around the world, the cricket from a monetary paying players has never reached this level. And by forcing 5-year contracts and 10-year contracts and things like that, or pushing that kind of stuff without it happening naturally in the game or in the competition, I think you're going to limit the earning potential of a lot of players.
Yeah, I think you'd limit earning potential, but also you'd have this, you're going to have that scenario of players constantly wanting to break contracts because everyone gets fed up after a couple of years. I mean, it's happening everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Happens in football, happens in NRL. Players constantly want to break contracts and don't want to, you get picked by a team or you get kind of forced, auctioned off to a team, and you're like, oh man, I got auctioned off for 5 years.
That's not a bad thing though. If you think about where some of these sporting rivalries come from, players going...
Well, from Figo going from Barcelona to Madrid.
Figo. So
that kind of stuff does, bring out the spite in people. There's a certain level of satisfaction when you see, a player that you've watched for 3 or 4 years on another team and not do well. That's a different level of satisfaction.
But is it okay? Your football season is 8 months long, give or take, or 9 months. Your NRL season is roughly the same duration. The NFL season goes from August to, I don't know, Feb, March?
Yeah, January, Feb, yeah.
The IPL season is 6 weeks. how do you build associations in 6 weeks that, if your player leaves and plays for another club, you start hating on them?
You should try and that's the next evolution. I think you've nailed it, Shivank. The IPL can stand to spread their games out a little bit more, and they can stand to have.
But they can't really, though, right?
No. I mean, like in terms of just purely from the IPL's perspective. I'm talking about the impact on the international game because, that's
Yeah. So the ICC creates this thing called the Future Tours window, wherein they dedicate which country can play as a host nation in what time throughout the year, and they do it for the next 10 years. So, for example, you cannot have a match in South Africa in the middle of June. It's just
Makes sense.
regulated that way. That's the Future Tours program. Currently, they allocate somewhere between 6 and 7 weeks for the IPL, and it's basically written in the Future Tours program. Like, you cannot have any more than, 4 countries playing internationals right now when the IPL is on. If you want franchise cricket to be the future, the window has to increase from 6 or 7 weeks that it is now to a multi-month thing. And then you consciously have to make international cricket take a backseat to it.
Yeah.
Well, you could.
Yeah, and maybe that'll give the importance back to international cricket when we actually see the international step out, rather than be like, oh, another tour. Yeah, okay, whatever. We just finished watching like a whole tournament. Like, we're fine. We got enough cricket already.
Well, the thing that I want to sort of come back to is the fact that you can have, if the game goes down to 2 formats, Test cricket and T20, you can have specialist players in both formats, right? So you could still have an international Test cricket season that overlaps IPL, because the specialist Test cricketers wouldn't be playing in the IPL anyway.
Yeah. And that is a really good point. Like, is then, we spoke about this obviously on the last episode as well, is that T20 is a completely different sport to Test cricket. Like, it should actually be a different sport, but at the moment they're considered one sport that, you can play in multiple. So you have like an Indian national team that plays Tests and T20s. It's not like a Indian T20 team versus Indian Test team. Like, it's not that, there's not a distinction made in that sense. So you have players who like only play Test cricket or only play T20. They play all over or wherever. But you're going to get that situation where some of the smaller nations, and I guess India, England, Australia, are probably going to be okay doing that, having that overlap of Test and T20. But what about the other nations? Because I think Pakistan will be fine. Pakistan will be lacking depth. West Indies will. Bangladesh will. Sri Lanka definitely will. So then what happens with those countries that are really lacking in those areas? Do they then, I don't know, just develop more players in the T20 area and say, we're going to...
I think that's it. They have to, because Sri Lanka is a good example. They don't have the funding at the country level to push cricket, and IPL and T20 cricket is a good source of income for these players. Now, if you supplement that correctly and if you generate enough of a talent pool, over time you may be able to start pushing back into Test cricket in a meaningful level. The same is true for Bangladesh. Pakistan, probably not so much. I think eventually, if they get their, lack of a better term, shit in order, then it should end up at a point that rivals India. But Afghanistan's a great example of the counter argument to this, where they've developed players focused on the T20 area, and they now have a pretty, I'd say, competitive T20 team. That's what we're missing out on if we don't focus on T20 cricket at the franchise level. We don't give these countries that don't have a lot of cricketers the earning potential to be able to survive long term and be successful over a longer period of time.
Do you feel, given the amount of money that's available in franchise cricket, what you'll then see is all the top talent moving on to T20 cricket, and then you have the next band down basically playing Test cricket, because they couldn't make it into franchise.
Test cricket is just for under-19s now.
Something like that, because love it or hate it, franchise cricket is where the money is.
It's a toss of the coin because there's still tribal. That the biggest tribalism in cricket.
It is purist.
Yeah, exactly. It's a traditional
in Test cricket as well.
It's traditional. It's the purest form of cricket, and there is real tribalism, and that's obvious even today when we're watching the Ashes. The England crowd were basically clapping every single ball, whether it was a block, as long as it wasn't a wicket, they were clapping it.
Yeah.
I think Shivank's in real danger of invoking the spirit of the game. And while we're speaking about spirit of the game, I think that's a great point to end today's discussion and episode on. Thank you for joining us. We've loved your thoughts and opinions from Kevin and Shivank. I hope you've enjoyed listening to us. As always, you can get Sports Nerdy with the team on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Backpass Pod. We'll be back with another few different segments on the Backpass, and that actually concludes our Backpass Explains season. We'll be coming up with a few different approaches for the show next time. So tune in. Thank you.